Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to class. Welcome to English language class. Okay, welcome. It's good to have you here again. All right, so this is English language class, and like I mentioned yesterday, we are looking at a new topic today. All right, we're going to be starting with sentence completion and interpretation today. All right. Sentence completion and interpretation. Okay, but let's quickly have a review of what we did yesterday. A quick review just before we move into today's class. So, from the previous classes, we've been looking at synonyms, antonyms, and context. And like I mentioned in our introductory class, I mentioned that your UTME has like three sections to it. You have the lexis and the structure, you have the comprehension and the summary passages, and then you have the oral skills or the oral forms. All right, so we started with lexis and structure, and under it we have synonyms and antonyms, which we've dealt with for about four classes. Yes, so and we mentioned that context is very important when choosing synonyms and when choosing antonyms. So it's very important you put context into place. And then yesterday we concluded our class on synonyms and antonyms, and then we were able to look at the common synonyms and antonyms mistake that people make that could cost them a lot. All right. So for you to understand everything that we have thought for the classes that we've had, we were able to look at the mistakes that you should avoid so that you do not pick inappropriate answers in your examination. And then I gave about 7 points. And that's number one, confusing similar but not identical synonyms. Number two, that's choosing the wrong degree of meaning. Number three, that's misusing synonyms in formal and informal context. Number four, that's false synonyms. Number five, that's choosing a word that is too general or too specific. Number five, that's choosing a word that is too general. Then number six, that's mistaking negative words for positive words, and then mistaking positive words for negative words. And then finally, falling for tricky answer choices. All right, and we were able to go too deep into this point to see how you can really avoid those mistakes. So today we are starting on a new topic, and like I mentioned, that's sentence completion and interpretation. Usually, when you find something like this, it's very similar to your questions on synonyms and antonyms. All right. But in this case, it's like a fill in the gap. And I'm sure that you are very familiar with filling the gap because, of course, I think from primary school, you started doing something like filling the gap, like Ade is a dash, and you're expected to choose from the options. Ade is a dash, option A, lion, option B, girl, option C, mother, option D, boy, and then you have to fill in the gap. Ade is a etc. Ade is this, Ade is that, and then you have to look at what the appropriate answer is before you fill it in. So I'm sure we are very familiar with what filling in the gap means. So sentence completion and interpretation is basically filling in the gap. So the fill in the gap that you're very familiar with or you've been very familiar with from primary school, yes, that's the fill in the gap that we are talking about. But in this case, we call it sentence completion because it means that something is missing in a sentence and then you are expected to complete it with the appropriate word or the appropriate phrase. All right. So, like I mentioned, we are looking at a new topic, and that is sentence completion and interpretation. All right. So sentence completion and interpretation. And again, like I mentioned, when you talk about sentence completion, it means there is a sentence, but something, maybe a word or a phrase, is missing in that sentence, and you are expected to fill in that missing space with the appropriate answer. All right. Now, before you can now complete a sentence, it means you must be able to interpret that sentence to put in the appropriate option. That is what we are looking at under this topic. So, of course, you know, sentence, a group of words that make sense. All right. And then when you talk about completion, that's like completing something. It means that something is incomplete and then there's a need for completion. When you talk about interpretation, it means there is a need to interpret, there is a need to break down some words for you to understand what you do with it. All right, so today we are going to be looking at types of sentence completion questions. So, the types of questions that you're going to meet with in your examination and what you expected to do with those ones. Again, for those just joining, welcome, welcome. We are looking at sentence completion and interpretation. All right. So, and like I mentioned, it's just very similar to your questions on nearest in meaning and opposite in meaning. Just that in this case, you're expected to fill in, there's a blank space, and you're expected to fill in that blank space with the appropriate word. And we're looking at the types of sentence completion questions. All right. So there are four of them that I'm going to be giving to you, and then this four will just help you know the type of question. When you see the fill in the gap question, you already know that, okay, this one belongs to this particular category, this one belongs to this particular category, and you would be able to know what to do with it. All right. So the first one we are going to be looking at, the first point under the types of sentence completion question, is vocabulary based sentence completion. All right, vocabulary based. Let's have that written. Vocabulary based. So number one is vocabulary based sentence completion. All right, vocabulary based. So when we talk about vocabulary based, already you know that we are talking about something that has to do with vocabulary. And contrary to the general opinion that vocabulary means very big words, okay, when you hear someone say that vocabulary, you're like, okay, someone is speaking a very big word. But contrary to that opinion, vocabulary does not mean big word. Okay, it means the number of words that you know. All right, vocabulary has to do with words generally, words and their meanings and how you can use them. All right, so when we talk about vocabulary based, of course, it means we are talking about meanings. All right. So in this filling the gap, yes, I mentioned that sentence completion and interpretation has to do with what we know as fill in the gap right from our primary school. All right. So we're very familiar with filling the gap. All right. So when you talk about this kind of filling in the gap, the what you're expected to fill in that empty space has to do with vocabulary. It means you are being tested, or your knowledge is being tested on how you understand the meaning of words, so as to help you fill in the appropriate word into the empty space. All right. So, like I mentioned, vocabulary based has to do with meaning. In this filling in the gap, or in this filling the gap question, what you are tested on, or what you are going to be tested on, is basically how you understand the meaning of word, so that you know the appropriate word out of the four options that you're going to be presented with, to know which one to fill in into the empty space. All right, so we're going to be having some examples to this effect. All right, so the first example, okay, so it says the professor's argument was dash. The professor's argument was dash as it was backed by thorough research and clear reasoning. Let's have that on the board so that everyone can have an access to it. All right. So we're looking at the first example for this point. The professor's argument was dash as it was backed by thorough research and clear reasoning. All right. Now, again, do not forget that when we talk about sentence completion and interpretation, we're talking about filling in the gap. All right. So in this case, we want to fill in this gap. This is the gap. This is the empty space. So this is supposed to be a complete sentence, but the sentence is incomplete because there is a space here. And this space requires that we fill it up with any of this which is appropriate. So how do we know the appropriate word to fill this in? So this point is saying that, or this question is basically a vocabulary based sentence completion question. Now you have to understand the meanings of these four words so as to know the most appropriate to fill this in. So when we talk about the professor's argument was dash, as it was backed by thorough research and clear reasoning. Now we look at the options one after the other. We have the option of unconvincing, and unconvincing means not believable. All right. The second option, obfuscation. All right. So that means not supported by evidence. Not supported by evidence. We have the option number three, which is compelling. All right. So that could mean very convincing or persuasive. And then we have the fourth option as shallow. That's like lacking depth or lacking meaning. Like when you talk about it in this context, lacking depth, it doesn't have depth or it doesn't have meaning. So once you understand the meanings of these options, you now know which one to fill it in. Of course, when you are doing something like this, I mentioned in our previous classes when we were doing synonyms and antonyms, we talk about context. And of course, when you're looking at sentences generally, you have to look at context before you know what to do with it. All right. So context is showing up here again. Context is showing up here again. It means you can't do without context when you're talking about English language generally. All right. So the professor's argument was dash as it was backed by thorough research and clear reasoning. All right. So the second part of this sentence talks about the argument that was backed by thorough research and clear reasoning. Okay. The argument was backed by thorough research and clear reasoning. So, which of the options do you think is now the most appropriate looking at this context? Okay. So, if the professor's argument is described as having thorough research and clear reasoning, then it means it must have been compelling. It must have been compelling. It must have been convincing. It must have been persuasive. Okay, because if you talk about unconvincing, you talk about the other options like option A, option C, option D, and you put them in, you slot them into the space. You see that they do not complete the sentence in the way that they should. But when you put out or when you put in the option, the compelling option in that empty space, you see that it fits and it looks like the most appropriate. So the professor's argument was compelling. Compelling. If you look at the meaning and you replace the words with the meaning, you can see that it still fits and appropriate. The professor's argument was very convincing and persuasive as it was backed by thorough research and clear reasoning. All right, so that makes it that the correct answer or the most appropriate answer to fill in this gap with is option C. So here is our answer. Here is our answer. All right, let's look at the second example under this point. All right, this example says the movie's ending was so dash that many people left the cinema in shock. The movie's ending was so dash that many people left the cinema in shock. All right, let's have that on the board so that we can have access to it. This is example two. Example two under the first point. The first point, we are still looking at vocabulary-based sentence completion. All right, the movie the movie's ending was so dash that many people left the cinema in shock. Okay, we have four options. We have predictable, we have shocking, we have entertaining, we have comical. All right, now we need to fill in this space with the most appropriate option. Okay, so to fill it in, we need to understand the meanings of this word. Okay, because we are dealing with vocabulary. So it means whatever you are tested on your knowledge of knowing what the meaning of the options are for you to know which one to put in to the empty space. All right. So when we look at the options, we look at option one, predictable. What does predictable mean? It means easy to guess or expect. That's like to predict, like you can easily guess something. When you talk about shocking, then you're talking about surprising, something surprising, or it could be upsetting. Okay. Then you look at option C, entertaining. Entertaining means fun to watch. Okay, when you're having fun with something, something enjoyable, yes, enjoyable or fun to watch or fun to read. Then when you talk about comical, you're talking about something funny or humorous. All right. So we go back to the sentence. The movie's ending was so dash that many people left the cinema in shock. Why would people leave the cinema in shock? Would they leave the cinema in shock because the movie was predictable? Now, again, I mentioned that context is very important. If the sentence was about the movie's ending was so dash that many people left the cinema, if the sentence ended there, then maybe predictable could have been the most appropriate answer, because once you can predict something, there are some people once they like to, or once they see that this movie that I'm watching, or this book that I'm reading, I can predict the ending. There's no need for me to go all the way. There are some people like that. Once they can predict a movie, they stop watching it. Once they can predict novels, they stop reading it. All right. So we can say that maybe predictable is the most appropriate for the option if the sentence had ended in cinema. But it says that many people left the cinema in shock. So why would they leave the cinema in shock? All right. So option two says shocking, surprising, or upsetting. All right. So can people, or the movie's ending, if the movie's ending was shocking, okay, can people leave the cinema in shock? Option three, the movie's ending was so entertaining. Okay. So if the movie's ending was so entertaining, what's there to shock people? Why should they leave the cinema shocked? All right. Then option four, comical. So if the movie's ending was funny and humorous, why should the people leave the cinema in shock? So you look at the meanings of these options and you see that, okay, the one that looks like the most appropriate of this option is what? Is option B. So B here is our answer. So the movie's ending was so shocking that many people left the cinema in shock. Okay, I hope you get this. So for this point, it means you are dealing with the meanings of the options, the meanings of the options for you to know the most appropriate to put in for your empty space. All right, we're moving into point two. Point two. And point two is context-based sentence completion. The first one we looked at is vocabulary-based sentence completion. So the second one we are looking at is context-based sentence completion. All right, so I'm going to have to wipe off the board now so we can have the other points on the board. All right, so the second point is context based sentence completion. Please do not forget and do not mix this point together. The first one we looked at is vocabulary based. The second one we are looking at is context based. Now, what does this mean, or what is expected of you when you meet with context based filling the gap? All right. So when I say fill in the gap, I'm talking about your sentence that you need to fill, your incomplete sentence that you need to fill in a word or a phrase into it. All right. So when you talk about context-based sentence completion, it means that the sentence provides a hint about the situation. All right. And you're expected to select the word that fits the meaning or the tone of that sentence. Okay, so your sentence itself, if you remember from our previous classes when we talk about context clues, that means from your sentence or from the words in that sentence, you are able to get the meaning, or you're able to get the correct option for what you expected to fill in to that space. All right. So it means that the sentence provide hints. The sentence itself, even though it's incomplete, it provide hints about the situation. And then you're expected to select the word that fits the meaning of that sentence. All right. So we're going to be looking at some examples to this effect. All right. The first example we have here says the athlete's performance was so dash that the judges awarded him a perfect score. The judges awarded him a perfect score. All right, let's have this on the board. Example one under point two. All right, so example one, the athlete's performance was so dash that the judges awarded him a perfect score. All right, in this case, what are we looking at? We are looking at context. What does the sentence imply? Even though this part is missing. This part is missing and we need to look for this part. But what does the other words imply for the meaning of the sentence? So if the athlete's performance was something and the judges awarded him a perfect score, remember this word, this is our context clue, perfect score. For someone to get a perfect score, what does it mean? All right, now you look at what the words, the options that we have. Of course, if you're a mediocre, you cannot get a perfect score. A mediocre is someone that is just average. The person is not failing and the person is not passing. All right. So let's say out of 100%, the person probably gets like 40%. That's like a mediocre, right? 40 to about 50%. You call the person a mediocre. All right. If you say disappointing, it means the person does not meet up to expectations. All right. So someone that's disappointing, or someone that's usually doing something disappointing, how can the person get a perfect score? Remember that perfect score is our context clue. And then we are talking about the athlete's performance that earned him a perfect score. So how can we describe that performance? The perfect score is our context clue to determining the appropriate word we are going to use. So if you say exceptional, exceptional means good, not just good, extremely good or outstanding. So if you say someone is extremely good, someone is outstanding, it means the person gets a kind of mark or a kind of score that is perfect. If you talk about option D, ordinary, I mean, something that is ordinary cannot earn you something perfect. So it means you have to be extraordinary, you have to be exceptionally good, you have to be extremely good for you to earn a perfect mark. So for the judges to earn the athlete or the athlete's performance a perfect score, okay, so what do we fill this in? Looking at these options and looking at our context clue, it means what? It means that exceptional is our answer, because mediocre does not fit in this context, disappointing does not fit in this context, ordinary does not fit in this context, only exceptional fit this context. So we have option C as the most appropriate option for this word. Let's look at the second example. All right. The second example says, after a long day of hiking in the mountains, Sarah felt dash and decided to rest. Sarah felt dash and decided to rest. All right, let's have this on the board. Okay. All right, after a long day of hiking in the mountains, right, Sarah felt dash and decided to rest. This is context. All right. If someone has had a long day, hiking is a kind of sport, and we know that sport or exercise usually drains people. All right. If you exercise, if you run or you jog, you know how draining it could be. Even if you jog for like maybe 10 times, you're already sweating. You are breathing in and breathing out as if you had to cut down a whole tree. Okay. So it means that a long day, someone had a long day hiking in the mountains. That means the person was like engaged, fully engaged in the sport of hiking. All right. So Sarah felt dash. The person that has been hiking in the mountains felt something and decided to rest. This is our context. Okay. So the words in this sentence is the words in this sentence are helping us to get the appropriate word to fill this space in. So after a long day of hiking in the mountains, again, like I explained, long day of doing something that could exhaust you, something that could drain you physically. So the person involved in this thing decided to rest. When would you rest, or why would you rest? What have you done that you would rest? Now let's go to the options. All right, the first option we says is energetic. So can energetic feeling into this context after a long day of doing something like that's tasking like that, can you feel energetic? And why should you rest if you feel energetic? Do you get this point? Now, option B says refreshed. If you are feeling refreshed after hiking in the mountain, then it means something must be wrong with you. It means that you are not normal, because normally the way our bodies have been created, if you do something tasky, you expected to be tired. So if you are not tired after exercising, then maybe we need to come and see you so that you can help us out, and maybe you save all of us from getting tired unnecessarily. All right. Okay, so you are not expected to be refreshed after hiking, after exercising. All right. Option C, exhausted. Exhausted. What can make someone get exhausted? That means the person must have done something tiring. The person must have done something tasking. And then if you're exhausted and you decide to rest, it's understandable because, of course, everyone will see it on you and they will start telling you that you actually even need the rest. All right. Then the fourth option, joyful, feeling happy and cheerful. Okay. That's like joyful. Why are you joyful? You are joyful and you decided to rest after hiking. Does it fit? No, it doesn't fit. So the context of this sentence help us to choose the most appropriate option. And we know that after a long day of hiking in the mountain, Sarah is expected to be tired. Sarah is expected to be exhausted. And if Sarah decides to rest after being exhausted, then we know that this is our answer. So option C is the most appropriate for this option. That's like context based sentence completion. Please do not forget context. When we talk about context, you're talking about the sentence itself, the words in the sentence that help you determine the meaning of that sentence. All right. Can we move to the third point? The third point. All right, I'm going to have to wipe off this so we can have the third point. All right, the third point under types of sentence completion question. All right, the third point is grammar based sentence completion. Grammar based sentence completion. All right, we have grammar based sentence completion. Okay, so when we talk about grammar, of course, we are talking about the rules and regulations of English language that makes English language what it is. All right. So, for grammar based, it means your knowledge of the rules of English language is being tested. So the missing word depends on the grammatical structure of the sentence. So in this case, maybe you are tested on tense. Your examiner wants to know whether you understand what past tense means from present tense and from continuous tense, etc. etc. So when you talk about grammar, of course, you're talking about the rules of the rules in English language that makes English language what it is. All right, so we're going to be looking at our first example. Our first example. And it says the researchers are dash a new theory to explain the phenomena they have observed. Let's have this on the board. Okay. So this is point 3, example 1 under point 3. Example 1 under point 3. So the researchers are dash a new theory to explain the phenomena. Okay, so we have 4 options and we need to fill in the gap with the most appropriate option. All right, the researchers are dash. Now let's try to fill in all these options to see which one sounds good. The researchers are develop a new theory to explain the phenomena they have observed. Does that sound right? No, it doesn't sound right. The researchers are developed a new theory to explain the phenomena they have observed. Does that sound right? No, it doesn't sound right. Option C, the researchers are developing a new theory to explain the phenomena they have observed. Does that sound right? Okay, that sounds right. Option 4, the researchers are developing a new theory to explain the phenomena they have observed. Does that sound right? No, it doesn't sound right. Only one option sounds right. And why does it sound right? Option A is the present tense. All right. Option A is a present tense. Option B is a past tense. Option C is a continuous tense. And option D is a noun. This is not even part of the verb. So when you talk about verb tense, a verb tense needs to be in the present continuous form because the action is happening. Okay, from here you can see the researchers are doing something. That's like a continuous tense. They are doing something on a theory to explain something that they have observed. So it's not something that they have done. Okay, it's something they are currently doing, which is a continuous tense. There's no end to it already. So since this is our continuous tense, of course it means this is our answer. So you need to understand tenses if you are dealing with questions like this. So option C is our answer because this is the continuous tense and this action being performed by the researchers is still in the continuous tense. And since this is our only continuous tense, it means this is the appropriate answer for this option. All right. Can we have one more example under this? Okay, example 2. It says the teacher asked the student to dash their homework before the exam next week. Let's also have that on the board. All right. Example 2. The teacher asked the student to dash their homework before the exam next week. Again, we have 4 options. The first one says finish, the second says finished, the third says finishes, the fourth says finishing. All right, so which one sounds like the most appropriate? The finish is the base form. So the teacher asks the students to finish their homework before the exam next week. That's option 1. Option 2, the teacher asks the student to finish their homework before next week. All right, that's option 2. The option 3, the teacher asks the student to finishes their homework before exam next week. Then option 4, the teacher asks the student to finishing their homework before the exam next week. Which one sounds like the most appropriate? Of course, the base word or the base form sounds the most appropriate. That's option A. The teacher asks the students to finish their homework before the exam next week. And why is this the correct or the most appropriate one? So the verb, when you talk about the verb finish, all right, it should be in the base form for it to allow the phrase asked to. All right. So it should finish that phrase asked to. So the sentence itself is using an infinitive, and only the base form will fit in for that infinitive grammatically. So again, when you talk about grammar, there's a lot you need to understand about grammar. You need to understand your tenses, you need to understand infinitive and some other things. So when you talk about the infinitive to here, right, you need to complete it with the base form of the verb. Okay, so option A here is our most appropriate answer. So A here is our answer. So the teacher asked the student to finish their homework before the exam next week. All right, so we move to the last point for the types of sentence completion questions. So I'm going to have to wipe off the board for the last point. All right, so this last point is fill in the blank, fill in the blank with logical understanding. So in this case, your vocabulary is not tested, your context is not tested, your grammar is not tested, your logical reasoning or your logical understanding is tested. Okay, so you're just tested based on what you think should be the correct answer to fill in the blank space question. All right, so the correct word will fit in logically based on what makes sense in that context. Okay, let's have some examples to explain this better. Okay, so this type of questions just deals with logical reasoning or logical thinking or logical understanding. All right, so let's have this example. All right, so this example says the committee has decided to dash the new proposal until the next meeting for further review. Okay. So when it talks about your logical understanding, of course, it means you have to understand what these words mean too before you know what correctly fits into the space. So the committee has decided to dash the new proposal until the next meeting for further review. So when you talk about further review, it means it has not been concluded yet, or something on the new proposal has not been concluded yet, and it means that they are coming back to it. So when you say accept, if they've accepted it, then there won't be a further review. If they have rejected it, there won't be a further review. If they postpone it, it means there's a tendency for a further review. All right. If they had approved it, it means there's no need for a further review. So your logical thinking, what do you think the answer would be? Of course, it is to postpone. So the committee has postponed the new proposal. When you postpone something, it means you have to move it further or you have to move it forward. All right. You delay it or you put it off until later so you can attend to it later. All right. But option A and option D means to agree with it already. Option B means to do away with it. You don't need it. It means to refuse or to decline it. But when you postpone it, it means there's a tendency that you are coming back to it. All right. So option C, based on logical reasoning, is our answer. And we have this option C as the appropriate word. All right. Let's look at the last example before we take any question. All right. So example 2, this says, due to the tight schedule, we had to dash the meeting to a later time. Okay, let's have this on the board also. All right. A last example for point 4. Due to the tight schedule, we had to dash the meeting to a later time. All right, so if you have a tight schedule and you want to have a meeting to a later time, what options from these 4 options do you think would fit in? Okay, so would you have to hold the meeting to a later time, or shorten the meeting to a later time, or cancel the meeting to a later time, or reschedule the meeting to a later time? Remember that, okay, it's due to a tight schedule that something had to be done to the meeting to a later time. All right, so what do you think, when you think logically, what do you think fit in to this option? All right, so if you have to hold, it means you have to maintain as it is, and it means nothing has changed. If you have to shorten, it means you make it shorter. If you cancel it, it means you call it off completely. But if you reschedule, it means you have to change the time or the date to a new one. So if we think logically, it means rescheduling is the most appropriate. So reschedule is our answer, and option D is our answer. So due to the tight schedule, we had to reschedule the meeting to a later time. All right, so here is where we come to the end for sentence or types of sentence completion questions. I'm not sure if we have any question. Okay, so I saw someone says they do not understand one example. Please does the person understand now, or you want me to take it again before we go to the next, maybe the past question, and we put an end to the sentence for today? Someone says, I do not understand example one. Which of the examples from which point? Please kindly respond if you are still here, Enoch. Okay, so while we wait for that, let's attend to a past question. Okay, so I'm wiping off the board to accommodate our past question for today. Okay, so we have one question, and this question is from 2018 UTME. 2018 UTME. All right, so it says choose the option that best completes the gap. Choose the option that best completes the gap. Choose the option that best completes the gap. All right, so this is 2018 UTME English language. All right, so the question says, wherever the leader went, people struggled to catch a dash of him. Of him. Wherever the leader went, people struggled to catch a dash of him. So we have four options. Option one is glimpse. Option two is look. Option three is view. And option four is picture. All right, so we are filling in the gap. What kind of a question do you think this is in the first place? Okay, so if you look at the things that we have looked at today, the 4 points that we have looked at, is this supposed to be a vocabulary based question? Is this supposed to be a context based or grammar based or just logical understanding? Okay, so it means you need to understand the meanings of this word to put in the most appropriate. All right, so this is a vocabulary based question. So what does this word mean, so that you understand what to fill them with? All right, the first one is glimpse. And when you talk about glimpse, that's like to have a quick look, a brief quick look, or you say a brief look or a quick look at something. Okay, when you say look is a general term for just seeing or gazing at something. Okay, when you say a more extended look, then you're talking about view, which is usually longer. Okay, then you talk about picture, that's like a visual representation of something. So if the sentence mentioned that people struggled to catch a dash of him, so if you struggle to catch something, you struggle to catch an image, do you like just gaze at something? It means you're not gazing at that thing. It means you are not viewing that thing because you are struggling. And it means that thing is not a visual representation that is drawn down or photographed. So when you talk about glimpse, you're talking about a quick look or a brief look at something. So your answer, or the most appropriate, will be glimpse. So catching a glimpse. All right, that's like having a brief or a very quick look. So this is our answer, and option A here is our answer. So 2018 past question, just go over that section where you find filling in the gap. It's usually after nearest a meaning and opposite a meaning, or sometimes before it. So you can use the A1 Tutor app for definitely this question to see which ones you can attend to. So catching a glimpse. So wherever the leader went, people struggle to catch a glimpse of him. All right. So we're coming to the end of the class now. All right. Okay, so Emmanuel says, how do we know if the question is context based sentence completion? All right. Before you know a context based sentence completion, you need to understand the types of sentence completion. And I explained four. I explained four of them. Number one is vocabulary based. When you look at the options, you know that you need to know the meanings of these options before you can choose the correct meaning for the fill in the blank space. But when you talk about the context, you look at the option, and sometimes the options look like all of the options will sometimes look like when you put them into the space, they sound okay grammatically. But your context will help you determine that this is not about grammar, but about the context. What does the context says? What does the words in that sentence say for you to know the correct word or the most appropriate of the word? So for context, you are looking at what the sentence means itself to choose the appropriate word for the blank space. I hope I answered your question, Emmanuel. All right, so we'll be coming to the end of the class today. If you missed any part of the class today, kindly go over to our YouTube channel, One Tutor, to see what we have done on sentence completion and interpretation. All right, see you in the next class, and that will be on Monday. And kindly prepare for your next subject, which is mathematics. That will be coming up in the next 10 minutes. All right, see you in the next class. Bye bye.